Hi, my name's Sarah Holding, and to celebrate the publication of my new book, which is up there, CHAMELEON, I'm making a series of short videos about some of the ideas that went into it. And the first one, of course, that I've got to talk about is Atlantis, because the whole story is set during the fall of Atlantis, which I've speculated happened during a previous episode of intense climate change. So really, the three things I want to address in this video are: how come Atlantis really existed, because I really believe it did, when was it, and also where was it? And these were the three things that I had to kind of address very early on. And you'll see behind me this quite large pile of books about Atlantis. It's just part of the library that I've accumulated over the last 4 years while I've been writing it, trying to do justice really to the history of Atlantis as I see it, because of course it's all a bit sketchy, and some of the gaps are very large and have to be interpreted, and that's part of the fun, obviously, being a writer and using it in a fictional story. So the first question, where was Atlantis, is something that's been addressed by many writers, and people have tried to address it scientifically and speculatively, mythologically, archaeologically, you name it. The main writer about Atlantis is Plato, and his account is quite credible in lots of ways. He was not known for making anything up, and he got it on good authority from somebody called Solon, who'd spent a long time in Egypt and had listened to a lot of scholars in that part of the world. So Plato's description doesn't put it in the Mediterranean, despite what a lot of people think, and despite the fact that the Greeks were very interested in it. He says it's out past the Pillars of Hercules, which means that you have to exit the Mediterranean to find it. Lots of other people have decided that means it must be somewhere around the Azores, or maybe as far across as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, maybe even further into the Caribbean. Some people feel that the Earth's surface has shifted around so much that possibly Atlantis is lost between the 2 miles of ice that cover over Antarctica, and that somehow or other the continent of Antarctica is probably the residue of what was the civilization of Atlantis. But one of the things that caught my eye, and it's something that is visible from the International Space Station, is a place they call the Rishat structure. It's also known as the Eye of Africa, or the Eye of the Sahara. It's a land feature in the middle of Mauritania, some 400 miles inland from the west coast of Africa. And it's a series of concentric circles. Geologists and other scientists believe it's a collapsed caldera, which is a kind of a flattened volcano with a sort of big pocket of magma underneath it. And that somehow or other, when that collapsed, it left these concentric rings. But it's really a bit too concentric, a bit too geometrical, and there's some videos on YouTube that have also speculated about the connection that this might be, in fact, the remains of Atlantis. It's so hard to get to, very few people have actually visited. There's just a couple of videos that I've been able to find people actually on the ground exploring it. They've found cannonballs there, they've found whale bones there, in fact a lot of material that appears to have been washed up there. And if you look on Google Earth right now, you'll find the Rishat structure very easily. And you'll also notice that there's a lot of striations across that part of the southern Sahara, where it does appear that mud was maybe washed ashore and clogged up what was previously a shallow area of sea. And in Plato's description of Atlantis, he does make a big thing about the fact that it was actually impassable by mud, and that was what caused Atlantis to be abandoned, because it was no longer navigable by sea. So I decided that that's where my Atlantis was going to be in the story. It seemed to fit with the other things that I was considering at the time. And so the image that I've used on the front cover is actually by the European Space Agency. It's a composite image from several satellites that fly over the Earth. And they've made this beautiful image that I've been given permission to use. So that established where Atlantis was. And the other thing that has been coming to light in recent years is a number of impact craters that have been discovered in Greenland and in Chile and some other places as well, that are thought to have occurred at the end of the Younger Dryas period, which was 12,000 years ago. And it was actually a period of mass extinction when a lot of the megafauna died out. So a long time after the dinosaurs were wiped out by a previous similar incident, we have actual evidence now that this is a possible moment when our climate changed completely dramatically and completely radically, so much so that mammoths have been found in Siberia with buttercups still fresh in their mouths, flash frozen in the ice, and other evidence that seems to suggest that this came upon the Earth rather unexpectedly. So I had to also contend with whether or not the Atlanteans were clever enough to have figured out that this was coming by reading the signs, maybe looking at the heavens. What kinds of technology did they have to be able to determine that something was about to happen that was really going to be quite momentous and disastrous? So that put my date on a timeline that I felt comfortable with, that could actually fit with some of the facts that are now being discovered. And obviously then the last task was to imagine what Atlantis was like. And apart from the shelf of books that I had and Plato's very, very full description in the Timaeus and the Critias, you have quite a wealth of material at my disposal to make use of. So I won't give the game away, but one of the main characters, Mel, is the one that really describes and obviously loved living in Atlantis and thought the city was incredible. One of the things we do know about it was that it was formed from a series of concentric rings. The central one was where the palace was and also the main temple, and then that was surrounded by a ring of water, and then the next ring out was where the people lived. And then there was another ring of water around that, and beyond that, that's where the barracks were for the army and the navy and all their ships. And then a long canal that led from there to the sea, so kind of like a keyhole structure. Plato describes it as having mountains behind and the sea to the south and a wide plain that was used for farming purposes. So it was a pretty well set up place with very sophisticated architecture and mineralogy and very beautiful gardens, lots of horses and elephants, and lots of emphasis on the production of energy through the use of crystals. And King Atlas was one of the rulers at one period. So I've taken King Atlas as being the current ruler at the time that my story is set. So I hope you want to read more about my story Chameleon. It's available from all the online retailers and also from my website. You can get a signed copy at sarah-holding.com. Do leave me a comment below if you've got some interesting ideas about Atlantis, because I'd love to hear what you think.